Good morning, everyone. Thanks for coming. I'm Andrea Sato. I work at Wilton Library on adult programs, and I'm happy that you were able to come this morning for this important talk presented by SPED NET in partnership with the library, Wilton Public Schools, and the Newtown SPED PTA. Before I turn it over to Eve Kessler of SPED NET, let me just let you know about a couple of upcoming programs at the library, because I can't pass up this opportunity. Next week on Thursday evening, there is a hands-on session on ChatGPT to get you to understand how that works at 6:30. Then later in the month, on the 30th, there are two interesting programs. One is on digital SAT versus ACT on Zoom. And also on the 30th, there is something really new sponsored by ASML, who, as you know, is expanding in Wilton. They are sponsoring a trivia night for adults with beverages, alcoholic and non-alcoholic, and food. So that would be a lot of fun on Tuesday, January 30th. And lastly, on the 31st, League of Women Voters is sponsoring a talk with our state representatives, Cece Marr and Keith Denning. So with that, I'll turn it over to Eve Kessler.
Thank you, Andrea. Thanks, everybody, for coming out. Reasonable accommodations, really important and something that folks generally don't think about until it's too late. So Gerri is here to discuss it. Gerri Fleming began her career as a high school history teacher in New York City. After moving to Connecticut and starting a family, she opened a special ed advocacy practice representing students with disabilities. She's a graduate of SEED, a year-long US DOE-funded program in special education law and advocacy. Gerri earned her master's degree in disability services in higher education in December and now consults with parents whose children are in college or who are applying to college. As she's going to say, if you have questions that are important during the talk, please feel free to raise your hand. Otherwise, she'll take them afterwards. So you know this is being recorded, as all of our talks are recorded and can be found on the SPEDNet website, spednet.org. So if you have questions that are very personal in nature, you might want to phrase them so it doesn't seem so personal, and just be aware of that. So we're happy to have Gerri here.
Good morning. Can you hear me? Should I? No? Good morning. Is that better? Okay. Thanks for coming. As Eve said, my name is Gerri Fleming, and I'm presenting today on reasonable accommodations in post-secondary school. I'm here to help you to understand the differences in legal and in the law and in policy from the K-12 to post-secondary school. As Eve said, as we go through the presentation, if you have questions, if I'm unclear, if something is confusing to you, please, please, please ask questions. If you have the question, certainly somebody else has that question too. So feel free to interrupt, that's not a problem. But it is being videotaped, so in an effort to preserve your own child's confidentiality, wait until the end for those kinds of questions, and I'll be happy to answer them and even stay after beyond that if you need. Okay. Couple of caveats. The presentation is for informational purposes only. This is my little legalese. Every situation is different. The specific facts of a case can change my response to a scenario presented to me. Also, the law is constantly evolving, especially in this area. So this is not to be relied upon as legal advice. I'm not an attorney, and like I said, things change. And many times what I'm seeing is for the better. So this is all good. Today's agenda will be, we're going to talk about the laws that are that hold in post-secondary school, the process for obtaining accommodations, as well as suggestions for parents and students. Just to get a sense of who we have in the audience, do we have any teachers? Okay. Administrators? School administrators? No. Service providers? No. Parents? Mostly parents. Attorneys and advocates? Okay, good. For the parents, are your kids still in public school? If so, raise your hand. Any in college or a post-secondary, career or technical school, community college, et cetera? Okay, okay. Good to know. All right, the applicable laws. The special education law known as IDEA has no legal bearing in post-secondary education. There are no more IEPs, no more special education, no more FAPE, free appropriate public education, no more child find provision where the school must identify and evaluate your child if they suspect the child has a disability. Colleges do not provide special education. They don't seek out students with disabilities. They don't offer services, and they definitely do not evaluate students. Here is what does apply. Section 504, Part E. In primary and secondary school, it's 504, Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act, Part D. And that's what gives you the 504 plan. 504 plans do not exist in college. What you receive is a letter of accommodation that lists all of the accommodations for the specific courses that the student is taking. The student is required to present this LOA, the letter of accommodation, to a professor, and depending on what the LOA says, it may even say you have to have a conversation with the professor and negotiate the accommodation. And that's only in very specific instances, but generally the accommodation, the professor simply needs to give that accommodation to you. The student can also email the accommodation letter to the professor if that is an issue. And if the school has a policy that says, oh no, we want you to have a conversation, and let's just say your student has a disability like anxiety or a communication disability, you can say, well, I want an accommodation that I can email the professor rather than having sort of that confrontational situation after class or before class. Like, a student may view that as adversarial. And there's also the power differential that exists between a student and a professor. And that can be an intimidating process. So just so you're aware, that can be an accommodation in and of itself, that the process for talking to the professor can be accommodated. Yeah. So that comes from it is the result of the interactive process. And I'll get to that as we go along. But it is something, I wouldn't say necessarily negotiated, but it is something that is developed in a meeting between the student and the Disability Services Office. So a student needs to self-identify with with that office, and have a conversation. They will likely have to upload documentation. Many of these colleges have software systems, like maybe the school has something called Accommodate or AIM or Clockwork, and the student can do all of the scheduling and uploading of information, or you as the parent, your student can give you access to it, his or her ID number, all the stuff that you possibly need to get on that platform, and you can upload the documentation. One of the daunting pieces of this is that every school seems to have a different name for the Disability Service Office. Some call it, the Accessibility Office. Some call it the Ability Office. Some call it the Student Success Office. And some of them get, cutesy with the name, like FIT, it's the Fit Ability Office. So unless it's really hard to research this stuff. So here's a tip for you. When you are looking at colleges, if you go all the way to the bottom of a page, there's going to be, any page on the college website, there's going to be a part of the website that helps you to navigate, and one of them will be disability or accessibility services. And that is really for somebody who's coming to visit the college. So you make sure, like, hey, if grandma's coming to, the football game, and maybe she, needs accommodated seating because she's in a wheelchair, and I'm sorry for being so stereotypical there, but let's just say, forgive me that, but if that was the case, you would go to disability, just click on that link at the bottom where it gives the page navigation for a website. It usually gives you the link to whatever office is, the office, and then that would give you the right place to go, to tell your son or daughter to, this is the name of the office, because a lot of times it is not clear. And I found that, quite unnerving when you're trying to, look for a school for your student, your child, and you want to weigh different schools, how much, what sort of supports they give. Are they more liberal? Are they more strict in their interpretation of the law? There are nearly 4,000 post-secondary institutions in this country, and there are probably 4,000 different sets of policies and procedures on how to operationalize, implement the ADA in Section 504. And that's kind of annoying because this is a very expensive proposition. You're talking, you are paying upwards of, $60,000 to $80,000 a year for college, and it's pretty high stakes, and you don't want it to fail. So having all the information to make that decision, I think is, pretty important. Let's see. So there are differences. So you've got, IDEA, and that really, allows you to be part of the team. In high school, let's say, the course can be modified. Your student can learn something different than what the other kids are learning. The scope can be reduced if they, choose to. How the work is taught can be modified. You can say, I want Orton Gillingham for dyslexia. You can't do that in college. How the professor teaches is how the professor teaches. They have what is called academic freedom. And it's a principle that, many colleges have signed on for, and they are allowed to enjoy academic freedom, and they will pull that card whenever it suits them. So there are no modified tests, there are no alternate assignments, there's no reduction in assignments. If a student needs those things, the school would say, the college would say, well, then that student's not qualified to be here. Students, like I said, they have to self-identify when they're in college. They have to supply the necessary documentation proving that they have a disability. And the schools get to determine what's the appropriate documentation within reason. OCR, the Office of Civil Rights, and the Department of Justice are cracking down on this because there are some schools that have said things like, well, I'll give you an example of, where my son first went to school. That'll give you a clue. He first went there. They wanted a disability documentation that was no more than a year old, and they wanted specific tests. Well, the law says that that colleges, in order to be eligible under the Americans with Disabilities Act, the ADA, that it shouldn't demand extensive, medical or objective evidence. So my plain reading of that text, and again, I'm not an attorney, but my plain reading says, well, if it says, if a doctor, or a therapist or somebody says, this person has a disability and names the disability, they shouldn't be looking for very specific tests. Because that to me sounds like, demanding extensive medical analysis. And I would argue that perhaps the people in the Disability Services Office are not necessarily equipped to interpret it. The psychometrics value of testing is really complex, and it is something that, even the people who administer the testing may or may not have, a lot of expertise in. And so, to be a psychometrician, you need to be heavy into statistics and to understand, confidence intervals and, standard error of measurement and all the different, algorithmic formulae for, how to arrive at a number. And quite frankly, in my experience, the schools may not administer them according to protocol. So when a test isn't administered according to protocol, then they shouldn't be using the normed results, the normative tables to say, oh, this kid got a scaled score of 6 or a scaled score of 9 or whatever. And do the people in the DSO even know that a scaled score of 6 is at the 9th percentile and a 9 is at the 37th percentile? And I only know that because, years and years and years of reading these evaluations, and schools not necessarily putting down what that is. Or to say that a kid got an 85, a standard score of 85. Well, an 85 sounds good, right? Well, it's one standard deviation below the norm. It's, you know, it is at the 15th percentile, right? Is that right? I'll have to look that up. And that says to me that, you know, this is a kid who would have a hard time doing a lot of work, right? And that could also be a result that the schools arrive at because they want to arrive at that. You can play with this testing is all I want to say. So when the DSO, the Disability Service Office, receives this information, do they necessarily know what they're looking at? You know, it is a question. There is only one program in the country that offers a master's in disability services in higher ed. And one of my colleagues, Sonali Sarma, is here, and she took the master's program with me. And that's the only one. There are certificate programs. UConn offers one. There are some schools that are offering them. But by and large, the people who work in disability services offices do not have the, or may not have the requisite background in making these determinations. So they shouldn't be demanding, to my mind, extensive analysis. And I think OCR, the Office of Civil Rights, would agree with that. Accommodations that the student suggests that the provider, of the documentation, the provider or the person who did testing, the accommodations that are recommended by a provider or the tester are not necessarily going to be accepted. So don't assume that because you have, an evaluation that says my son needs, double time or a time and a half or something like that, that it will necessarily be accepted by the school, by the college. And, just so you know that, I did an internship as part of my program at Southern Connecticut State University. And, one parent said, well, I gave you his IEP, why isn't that being implemented? And it's because, the IEP has no bearing in college anymore. And an IEP is for 1 year only. It expires after a year. And that's, that was something for you to take up with the high school, not with the college. Another parent said, well, I gave you his 504 plan. Same thing. There are no 504 plans. And the other issue is that at college, the types of accommodations you receive are for that setting. So the differences between college and high school, I'll give you just one. In high school, classes generally meet, daily, unless you have one of those stupid block schedules, and then maybe it's every other day or whatever, some sort of nonsense. Sorry. You would not necessarily need certain accommodations because it meets daily. And when you're in college, it meets twice a week or maybe once a week, the class. And that may be really challenging for your son or daughter. And what a lot of kids think is, I've got all this time, I'm not spending 6.5 hours every day in class. I may have, 15 class hours, and the rest of the time is my own, not understanding, they should be reading, they've got to do a lot of work on their own, they should be studying, they've got homework, et cetera. And so the accommodations for somebody meeting daily and meeting twice a week would be different. Think about the differences in tests. If your class in college is an hour and a half, and your classroom time in high school was 45 minutes, maybe you didn't need extended time on tests. But in college, you are going to, because those are going to be very different sorts of tests. And you may not be able to get all of that information down to demonstrate what you know in that time period, because they are going to be demanding more of you. So those are just, differences to consider. So that's why it doesn't necessarily transfer over. It just wouldn't be appropriate. Sorry. The other thing is that for accommodations, there has to be a nexus between the requested accommodation and the disability. And what I mean by that is there has to be some sort of relationship. If you have, say, diabetes, and you ask for extended time on a test, you would have to explain that to me. Why do you need that? I don't see a ready relationship between those two things. If somebody said, I've got dyslexia and I use, and my reading fluency is quite slow, I would say, oh, okay, that makes sense. Or, my writing fluency is slower. Yeah, I understand that. Or I have a scribe because, I have a mobility impairment where, I have to, either I'm missing a limb or I have dysgraphia, so I have a scribe. That's going to take longer because you're going to have to talk to the person's going to have to write it down, and then, it's sort of a stilted process, so it's going to take longer. So you would get extended time. But for diabetes, I'm not seeing, a ready relationship between extended time. What I do see, what would be reasonable to me, is somebody with diabetes saying, I need to be able to take breaks in class. I need to keep my phone out because my blood sugar levels are on an app on my phone for the blood sugar sensor that I have, my Dexcom. I could see, we had one where a student with diabetes was in a nursing program, and they wanted her to wear very specific footwear, and she couldn't because of her diabetes. And so that was an accommodation that, we said she does not have to wear that footwear. It is not appropriate given her diabetes. So that's what I mean by the nexus. There has to be sort of like a logical relationship. And it doesn't mean that there wouldn't be one, and that's why you go through the individualized interactive process, because there may very well be something for this particular student, why they would need it, if that makes sense. Okay, so you can't discount it, out of hand, but in that interactive process, in that conversation that, I would have with a student or Sonali would have with a student, we would need to have some sort of, rational explanation for why that would be. Okay, and maybe it could be in the documentation, maybe it could be, you rehearse with your child how to answer questions. You could ask for an accommodation to say, I want all the questions in advance. Now, it is an iterative process, the interactive process. I can't say every question that I might ask, but there's a general list of things that I might, ask in that process. So just knowing what that is, would be helpful to help you sort of formulate what your answers would be as a student. There is no reason why a parent can't be a part of this meeting if your student allows you. If your child says, yep, I want my parent there. And maybe a school will say, well, we're going to need a power of attorney, or, you know, we're going to need you to sign a release. Like I said, this is high stakes. The school is supposed to, the high school is supposed to give your student, you know, the transition skills needed for the next step. The reality is that doesn't happen. The reality is that, you know, the law allows them to give, you know, 2 goals on an IEP, you know, qualifies for a transition program. 2 goals, and those goals are generally things that the student would already do, like the student will take the SAT. Well, that's actually required under Connecticut law now. It's one of the high stakes testing that, you know, that they appealed to the feds to take instead of, you know, another sort of test. So every student takes the SAT by and large. Or it would say something like, you know, the student will go to the guidance counselor to discuss college counseling. Well, you know, I would expect that would happen. That shouldn't be a goal on an IEP. That should just happen as a matter of course. What else, you know, would you do? That's the guidance counselor's job. And if you do that for every student, then even students with disabilities are part of that every student, you know, grouping. So if that's the sort of plan that we see on an IEP, if that's what passes for a plan, I don't see any, I've never seen a goal that says, you know, we will do role plays and, you know, assist the student in learning the interactive process to request accommodations in college. I've never seen it. And if any of my colleagues, the attorneys and advocates in the room, if they've ever seen anything like that, because I haven't in the 15, 16 years that I was an advocate. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Nope. No. So once the student is admitted into college, even FERPA, the Family Education Rights and Privacy Act, the educational records, the act that governs educational records. Like we have HIPAA for medical records, FERPA governs educational records. If you are 17, if you are under 18, and you are in college, as the student, you retain the rights. Yep. The student is responsible. But that doesn't mean, so I guess I'm more of an old-fashioned parent, and I figure if I'm paying, you're listening to me, kiddo. And I would say, you know, I really want you to apply, you know, to get eligibility. And with my own son, I negotiated it. And I said, I don't care if you ask for accommodations you are never going to use. I want you in that office. I want them to know who you are, because in a way, it's putting the college on notice. This is a student with a disability, and being in the system already makes it that much easier to add accommodations as you go along. If you have to start the process from, you know, zero, and this is what I saw a lot of, midterms. Oh boy, did we get a lot of kids asking for accommodations during midterms week, and they wanted things like extended time. Well, we didn't have time to do that because it was midterms and we were proctoring exams. So, you have every kid taking midterms, and every kid who gets extended time needed to be in a room, and if you had a reader, you had to be in a separate room. I mean, just the logistics of it meant that it was every hand on deck. So that meant that we really couldn't meet for meetings to determine eligibility. And the process really, at its quickest, is still at least a week. It's at least a week, if not much longer, depending on how busy the office is, how many employees they have working in the office, and how quickly you get the documentation to them. So it's not quick. It's like, oh, I've got an emergency with my kid, and let's schedule a PPT meeting. And, it takes them 2 weeks to schedule the PPT meeting, and then they say 2 weeks later it'll finally be, enacted. Meantime, your kid is crashing and burning. Yes? Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And but the issue is they won't, at least I haven't seen this, they will not say, well, we'll give you, X, Y, Z if you come to the school, because they don't necessarily have the bandwidth to, you think about the number of students who apply and the number of students who are accepted, and you still have, all of the kids who are currently in the program. It's about 25% at this point. 25% of the kids are disclosing, a disability to disability services and requesting accommodations. So what I would do, though, it's a fair point, I would look at the disability website that, is on every college. I would also look at their mission statement and see, do they even mention disability in their mission statement? It's kind of strange how often that's left off. I would have a conversation with the Disability Services Office. And it's also something that, sometimes students disclose a disability in their college application. Sometimes they don't. You don't have to. And, call me a cynic, but my thought is, there are probably some colleges that say, well, this kid's going to be more expensive than another kid, so we're not going to admit this kid. That's the cynic in me. They would say, oh, we're not allowed to do that. Yeah, you're not allowed to do it. Does it happen? I think it probably does. So I would look at the mission statement, the values statement, the vision statement of a college, and see. You kind of get a sense of like the ethos of the college when you do that, and you do this like deep dive. I looked, at a particular Connecticut college, at their they had put their disability policies online, and it was like, wow, so few do this. And I read this, and it was gatekeeping. I looked at it and thought, this is your way of trying to exclude a student from getting what they could. So they looked at it more as a way to eliminate rather than a way to add. So if you don't have, the documentation that is, less than a year old, then we're not going to make you eligible. If you don't do, it was all about how are the ways that we can, cut down on the numbers of students we have to give, the extended time or, whatever. Like that's the way I interpreted a lot of this. So that's what I would do. I would be surprised if a college would say to you, we'll do, this is what we could give or we will give. Yes? Yes. Yes, so one of the slides coming up talks about how you have to be a qualified student with or without accommodations. That's what the law says. You need to be qualified with or without accommodations. What you're saying is there's a program, and a program is like special ed. You're meeting, once a week, or you've got somebody reviewing homework and syllabus and, et cetera, helping them, with executive function tasks. That is not an accommodation. That's specialized instruction. And that's why they are able to do that, and that's why they're able to charge you for that. What I would say is there are plenty of schools that offer that as part of their accommodation or college success programming. So my son went to the new school, and ultimately, he went to Parsons and ultimately graduated from there. And I was shocked to learn that they had 15 executive function coaches. That was as part of the accommodations office. And you could get a slot, an hour-long slot once a week with this person as part of your accommodation, letter. And I was like, you are doing that. You are, because you think about what we pay for that now. I mean, it could be $200 an hour, right? And so if you have a school that already offers that, just say that's where you're going, because that person is going to be so much better than like a remote situation. You may have somebody who's very talented in executive function, but somebody who's on campus can go to the professor and say, what do you mean by this assignment? What are you looking for? Can you tell me? Or, maybe it's another student. Usually these are graduate students who are, executive function coaches or tutors or whatever. They might have taken the class before. And so they would have that, insight to say, like, no, he doesn't mean that, or she doesn't mean, all that you are, conjuring up in your head, or wait a minute, this isn't a Sunday night assignment. This is something you're going to have to work on, for weeks and weeks. That sort of, on the ground insight is really invaluable to my mind. I mean, you're welcome to do a remote executive function, situation, but if you can get a school that already does that, and you can still do that, but still get it from the school, so you have that information. Yes. Oh, yeah. Yeah, I would say, what sort of, supports and services do you offer? And ask about student success. You can see, part of this is knowing what to look for. And like I said, they're going to give it a cutesy name, and you'll never know what the heck the office does. And I'll say, it's even hard applying for jobs because, if I go on LinkedIn and I say I want, disability services, well, I'm not getting any of the jobs that are accessibility services. There's just no way of figuring it out. It's just as annoying for me as it is for you as parents or for the students looking for this information. But a lot of schools have what's called student success programs. And that's where you get, and these are programs that are open to everyone. And in many ways, your student might be more willing to engage with student success than they will with student disability services. And student success is the proverbial special education. It's the instruction. It's executive function coaching. It's the writing center drop-in. It's the math center drop-in. In some schools, they will give individualized tutoring in every course that they offer. That was my experience at Southern. I was blown away. You're taking finance, they'll get you a tutor. You're having trouble. Yes, it's part of the tuition. And darn it, you are paying a lot of money when you send your kid to school. So get it, have them use that because it is part of the tuition. Yes. Assistive technology is considered an accommodation, or it's considered an auxiliary aid, and it is mentioned in the statute under 504 and under the ADA. And as such, they cannot deny it. The big thing that we hear a lot about is the professor denied, I have an accommodation to use, an assistive technology like Glean or Otter AI or something, some sort of like software program that records the lecture, gives a transcription of it, and then allows you to, modify it. You can, put in summaries, you can drop in diagrams, etc. And it's really great for somebody with, say, ADHD or dysgraphia. They have a hard time paying attention, or, they can't write that fast, or they don't know what's important. There's one system called Note-Taking Express, and you can either get a transcript, which could be quite unwieldy when you think about, a class that's over an hour long, how long that transcript would be. But Note-Taking Express also, you can sign up for note summaries. And so you upload the recording of the class, and somebody at Note-Taking Express goes, listens to it, and then provides summaries of it. That's pretty cool, I think, rather than reading a 20-page transcript and still not knowing what's salient. What were the important parts that the professor noted in the lecture. So something like Note-Taking Express is really cool. What I would say is, and it's one of my tips later on, if you think your student will need assistive technology because you are not going to get special education, let's just say you've got a reading disability, and you're still not reading, as fluently as, you would want by the time, 12th grade rolls around, I would say, as you see that, how will you be able to close that gap? Will you be on grade level by the time you graduate? I would ask for assistive technology to, like a screen reader that reads everything out to the student at the same time. And what you would want to do is get the student to pick up speed, because listening to something, think about like if you listen to audiobooks, that takes a long time. It's really arduous. So train the brain to go at double speed, or at least time and a half, like just to speed up the reading back to you, so that you're better at, think about the volume of work that you're going to get in college. So you would want to be able to go through that a little more quickly, listen to it more quickly. Whenever we had YouTube videos to watch, I always put it on double time and put on the closed captions, because I was like, I cannot sit through this. I mean, it's 8 minutes that I will never get back. So if I just do it at 4 minutes and read it, because the pace is so much slower. So the ability, you can read so much faster than you can speak. So that's important, to get assistive technology now, while they're still in school, so that they are used to it. Some schools will say, we won't train you on the assistive technology. At Southern, they would train them. I was like, again, blown away. They would train the kids on the assistive technology, and give them a laptop, give them the smart pen, the LiveScribe pen, all of that, and the notebooks. And they would say, listen, if you need more notebooks, come, we'll give you more notebooks, because you need a special notebook to use the LiveScribe pen. The LiveScribe pen is it's a pen that you write with on this special, paper in a notebook, and the notebook has like little dots on the page that you can't see. It's sort of like woven into the fabric of the paper. And when you start recording, the pen is a recording device. When you start it, you tap on the bottom of the page. There's a little like icon that you tap on the bottom of the page to let the pen know, okay, time is starting now. And the first note that you take is, if you were to press on that with the pen later on, if you were to tap on the first thing that you wrote on that notebook that day, it takes you to that point in the lecture. So if you zoned out at some point in the lecture, and then you were like, oh gosh, what I would do is I would put a little X on the page. I would skip a page, so that I could add in the notes. But then I would know this is where I, woke up again, and I could go back later and listen to the recording prior to that to see what it was that I missed. But I would go to the X to say, okay, so this is where I was in the recording, so that you're not listening to the whole thing all over again. And those are the kinds of like little tips that you learn when, as you're doing this in high school or even grammar school. It's great for math. Think about, you're doing a math problem, and the teacher is explaining how to do the math problem, and then you think about like a quadratic equation, how you're solving for x, and whatever you do to one side, you do to the other side, and so that you have the teacher sort of explaining how to solve for x in the algorithm. So you would be able to press on the problem and see what the teacher was explaining to you. And you could say to the teacher, can you explain this problem to me, and record it at the same time, so that if you were still having trouble with it. And then you would at least have the teacher there, the recording, so that you would understand how to solve that problem. So that's the kind of stuff that you would want to be used to doing prior to getting to college, because think about all the things you need to know for college. You need to know how to do your laundry. You need to banking. You'd have to do banking. You've got to be self-directed in learning. You're possibly away from home for the first time. It's daunting for typical kids. For kids who are, neurodivergent or have disabilities, it is, leagues more difficult. So the more of a chance you can get to get a jump on this stuff, the better. No, the school, you ask for, no, that's part of your college tuition. But even in, primary and secondary school, assistive technology, you'll see, the old IEP. It would say on page 8, assistive tech required, and they would always check the no box. Not required. And, my answer, in an email was, and did we discuss this at the IEP? Who filled that out? Because it was never discussed. It was just somebody made that unilateral decision outside the purview of the PPT, and that's not allowed. So I would ask for, if you can now, an assistive tech eval, and get that information now to see what your student could potentially need for college and be ready to use it at college rather than, it's great that Southern will train them on it, but that's time that, they have to then expend, and some kids will do it and some kids won't. Okay, let's see. The definition of disability. I've put the whole definition here, and I'm just going to read out the piece in bold. It's a physical or mental impairment that substantially limits one or more major life activities of such individual. So there are no per se disabilities in the ADA. What they do is they sort of, make it as vague as possible to capture as many things as possible. And that's what you should know. Take a look at that, read that, be familiar with it, so that when you say, when they say, well, he's got dyslexia, but, he's fine, you would see that, well, dyslexia is one of the listed disabilities. So, I would expect that you would do something for that. Here we go, the qualified student with a disability. In order to gain entrance into a program, one is the ADA definition, and the other is the definition that you find in Section 504. So they say a person who would be able to meet the requirements of the program in every respect except as to the limitations imposed by their disability. So that's basically saying, as long as you can get an accommodation that makes you able to do the work, then you are considered qualified. And that is important, because you could be admitted to a college, and then they find out as you're going along that you're actually not qualified. So you may be academically qualified, but there may be something else that says you're not. I'll give you an example. We had a student who was doing student teaching, was going to do student teaching, and she asked to do it remotely. You can't do student teaching remotely. She's like, well, I have a disability, I'm anxious. And it's like, well, then maybe this isn't the career for you if you can't be in front of a classroom, like you have trouble talking in front of a classroom. So think about those things. There's a listserv, a national organization called AHEAD. It's the Association of Higher Education and Disability. And you can, look that up too and get some ideas about, what should be done. But somebody on the listserv posted a question, and it was for a student who was in a medical program, and it was, a certificate program to be like a PET scan technician or X-ray technician. It was something like that, and the test that was required of them was that they would have to be able to administer this scan that gave radiation within 4 minutes. Well, the student couldn't get it done within 10. And so the student asked for an accommodation. And the person on the listserv was saying, you know, is this okay? And so that's what I mean, like, they don't necessarily know. I mean, to me, it seems rather obvious. I don't want 10 minutes of radiation. You know, if I can avoid it, you go to the dentist and they put that heavy lead blanket on you and they run out of the room and you're stuck with all those things in your mouth, and you feel like it's an eternity, and they come back in, you know, 15 seconds. So, you know, 10 minutes seems inordinate. 10 minutes says to me, you're not qualified for this as a job. Potentially, you know, you need to be able to do that within a certain time frame. You know, if you want to be, you know, you want to work as an EMT, and you're in an EMT course, and you can't lift 80 pounds or whatever it is that you're required to lift because you have, you know, a physical disability, well, then you're not qualified, because there's no, you know, these are emergency situations. You need to be able to act quickly and with intention. So that's what we mean by you have to be qualified. You have to meet the requirements. And if you can't, find another, you know, doesn't mean that you shouldn't go to college, or you just find a different, you know, a different course of study. Okay, next slide. The rules of construction. All right, a rule of construction basically is how the law is interpreted. I put this in here. It's this slide and the next slide, to basically give you a sense of what is required, and how these things should be interpreted. The first time the ADA was passed, the Supreme Court was so restrictive in how it interpreted it. Somebody did an analysis of all the cases that, you know, came up in the first few years after the ADA passed in 1990, and they found that 93% of all cases that were brought by people with disabilities were lost because they couldn't get past the first prong of, do you have a disability? I mean, there would be people, you know, their cases were so compelling. It's like, you know, I have MS and I'm in a wheelchair and I'm asking for, you know, or I need to use a wheelchair, you know, every so often, and I work in a supermarket, and I asked for a stool to you know, as a cashier. And they said no, because I didn't qualify as having a disability. You know, like, how do you not get past that first prong? People with cancer, people with HIV, they were just finding, nope, don't have a disability. So what happened, you know, eventually is that Congress passed the Amendments Act to the ADA in 2008. And for the definition of disability alone, they added 9 rules of construction saying that, you know, a major life activity does not have to be of central importance to your life in order for it to still, you know, be construed as a major life activity. And you know, things that, you know, it needs to substantially limit. That doesn't mean, you know, according to the rule of construction, that it has to be, you know, severe, you know, has to severely impact you, or you have to be not able to do it. And when this happened in 2008, DOJ and DOE, the Department of Ed, issued a Q&A document and about the new ADA. And they sent a Dear Colleague letter to every administrator and said, any kid that you denied a 504 plan since 1990, you need to make it right. And any kid, you know, who is still within your system, you need to convene the 504 meeting and do that again. And I will say to you, I had kids, being made eligible much more easily as a result of the 2008 amendments. So I put that in there. Like I said, there are no per se disabilities under the ADA, but the Congress got so angry at some of the things that the courts were saying that they actually listed, some of these and said that deafness substantially limits hearing. Hearing is a major life activity. Therefore, you qualify. I mean, it was that ridiculous that they had to go to these lengths and put this in the statute so that the courts would be able to interpret it, the right way. On the other hand, maybe Congress should have done a better job at, writing the statute in the first place, and, rather than giving all this wiggle room for people to get out of it. Okay, let me just go here. Reasonable accommodations, okay. They are designed to prevent disability discrimination. You are to have an equal opportunity for success. It is not designed to guarantee success, but an opportunity for success. And you can argue, it's easier to argue the other way. If you don't give this to the student will not be successful. If you've got a student who has dyslexia or low vision or blindness, and the textbooks are not digital, and it can't be blown up, zoomed into for somebody with low vision, or used on a screen reader, or for somebody with dyslexia, or blindness to be read aloud with a screen reader, then you're not giving them equal opportunity for success. It has to be as accessible at the same time that it is accessible for the other students. So you can't make somebody wait for 2 weeks while you make it, into a digitized format. So a lot of schools are making things digital proactively as a result of this. So just so you know, it's easier to think about it in the reverse. Academics, you can have reasonable accommodations in academics, in housing and residence life, transportation, extracurricular or campus activities, except if you go overseas, like if you're thinking about, a semester abroad, you're not necessarily guaranteed certain accommodations unless the program is, an American program overseas. Some of the European countries are members of AHEAD. Look for that to see who is a member of AHEAD, and that will tell you, that they will afford accommodations. The UK, Ireland, I know very specifically have laws similar to what we have in the United States. Just to give you a sense of what reasonable, another definition is, or further definition, is that they are adjustments that do not change what the student learns. You cannot ask for a reduction in the rigor. So extended time on a test in a reduced distraction setting does not change what the student learns, just how much time it takes the student to demonstrate what he or she knows. Modifications. Schools can be asked to modify their policies, not academics, but they can modify their policies, their practices, and their procedures, as long as those practices would take away a discriminatory policy, procedure, or practice. So having a lighter schedule or additional time to complete a degree, you know, the schools may say, oh, we want this degree completed within 4 years or 5 years or 6 years, but the student may take 8 years because of a disability. They can only take, say, 2 classes a semester. They should be allowed to do that unless there is a reason why. Like there's a scope and sequence to a program, and you need to do your clinicals at the same time you do, you know, something else, you know, the academic courses, whatever. There may be a reason why courses are tied together and they have to be done in a specific order and, you know, in a density, if you will. Like you have to take all these courses together. But if there is no reason for it, you should be able to have a lighter schedule. A caveat, this will affect financial aid. Just because the federal government has this law, they still will reduce financial aid, or you may not even qualify for financial aid. So just so you're aware of that. Any modification to a policy will have, you know, an impact, so find out what that impact is. An example, you know, just to go through a few, housing and residence life. I had, you know, years ago, I had you know, one of my students that I was advocating for in in high school had celiac. And when she went to college, they were insisting that she had to take the meal plan. And she couldn't eat anything in the meal plan. You know, it had gluten. It, you know, there was, you know, no separation in the, you know, whoever was, you know, the group that was, you know, doing all the cooking in the cafeteria. They didn't have any sort of separation. And not only did we argue that she shouldn't be forced to pay for a meal plan, we also argued that she should get her own refrigerator and a hot plate and a microwave in her dorm room. And they didn't want to do that because, you know, it overloads the electrical circuits and whatever. But we were able to argue that they needed to modify their policy in Res Life so that, you know, she would be able to successfully attend. Air conditioning is another reasonable accommodation for somebody with, you know, asthma, perhaps. A modification, you know, would be that changing the meal plan. Transportation, an accommodation would be, you know, if you had a mobility disability, that you could park close to each building, that you would get like a parking spot next to each building, or that there would be, you know, a door opener that, you know, would allow you to get into a building. A modification to a policy, let's allow a freshman to have a car on campus. Extracurricular or campus activities, an accommodation would be to have an ASL, American Sign Language interpreter for theater production for somebody who is deaf, or, you know, events to be held in an accessible place, if, you know, for those with mobility issues. And for physical and virtual environments, the accessibility would be removing physical barriers and removing the digital barriers in those situations. Let's see. So students seeking the accommodations, they have to self-identify, they have to supply the documentation. It has to be from a qualified and appropriate professional. I can't tell you how many times I saw a provider, an online provider, students wanting their pet to come to the college dorm. And they would say, well, you know, this is my emotional support animal. And, you know, maybe that's legitimate. But if that is legitimate, what I would say is it probably shouldn't be from an internet provider who charges $69 to write the letter. And just, you know, if this is something, you know, that the student needs, and I'm not discounting that the student, you know, may very well need this, just be sure that this isn't something that will take away from your students' you know, time to do, you know, academic work or to socialize or whatever. I mean, if it's valid, absolutely. On the AHEAD listserv, there was somebody who wanted a jumping spider as an ESA, an emotional support animal. And I don't know, maybe, you know, call me crazy. I just think, you know, you should be fuzzy and, you know, I wouldn't want a spider. I would just, you know, get a pest service in and say, oh, get rid of that. So that's something. And you can't get multiple emotional support animals. And think about the animal. A lot of these dorms are very small. And when you have an ESA, the school requires the ESA to be boarded in a cage that the student brings during the times that you are not in your dorm room. So, you know, if you've got like, you know, a big Labrador retriever and you've got to stick them in a cage when your, you know, kid is in class, that may be, you know, not so pleasant. Because, you know, if a roommate opens the door and the dog runs out, like that's a problem. So that's the reason for that. And, you know, somebody can't say, well, I'm allergic. If you need an emotional support animal and, you know, your dorm mate says, well, I'm allergic or I don't like cats or whatever, that's not a good enough reason. So just be aware of that as well. However, if you do have an emotional support animal, you have to be in control all the time. There was a case not too long ago, again on the AHEAD listserv, where they were told that the emotional support animal was left for the 2 weeks, you know, the first 2 weeks of the Christmas break, and left in the dorm. And when Res Life went into the dorm room, they found multiple bowls of food and water left out for the dog. And that to me is that's heartbreaking. That's, you know, that shouldn't be. So just to be aware of, you know, like that kind of stuff. They have to be, you know, under you at all times, under your care at all times. So a bona fide diagnosis and diagnoses, you can't just say, I have a disability. We received a letter from a doctor that says the student has a disability. Well, what is it? Because we can't make the determination that there's a nexus between what you ask for and what we can approve unless we know that there is, you know, that there's some reason for it. So that's important. And ideally, it should outline the impact and the functional limitations of the disability. The student's disability is never shared with the professor, and the professor should not ask. What the professor receives is the list of accommodations and just told, you know, you need to do this. And the faculty cannot, you know, out a student. Their privacy, their confidentiality, their status as somebody with a disability is not, you know, public, should not be, you know, publicized. And students have to follow the procedures outlined in the letter of accommodation. And what that means is, let's just say you have something like extended time on papers and assignments. That doesn't mean, it's not time and a half, it's not double time. What it means is you have to go to your professor and say, I'm going to need 3 more days to complete this paper. And the professor can say, okay, or I think 2. I think I'll give you 2 days. And that is reasonable. Because a lot of times kids are not, and I'm guilty of this myself, it's not about my writing or how slowly I write or whatever, it's that I procrastinated. So if you give them extended time, you're feeding that beast of procrastination, and I am guilty. If I cleaned my self-cleaning oven twice this last semester, I would rather clean a self-cleaning oven. I mean, on my hands and knees, I am scrubbing. And I said to my husband, look how clean it is. And he was like, I could have just pressed the button and overnight and it would have been clean. But it was my way of procrastinating. So never is my house cleaner than when I have a paper due. Because anything is better than doing that paper. So, and that's as an adult. Paying for it myself, like I really should do this. So you can just imagine our kids, how they would procrastinate. So that is one of the accommodations I would say to be very careful about. You may not want that because it's a snowball effect. If the kid is, gets an extra few days to work on a paper, then they're ignoring the stuff that's due. If the paper's due on Monday and they don't have to bring it in until Wednesday, then they're ignoring Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday's work while they're doing the paper. So they get behind. And it's usually, that extended time is usually only for long assignments. They won't give it to you for regular assignments. Like you don't, if your math homework is due on Tuesday, your math homework is due on Tuesday. And, you generally don't get extended time, but for larger projects. Let's see. The LOA only lasts for 1 semester because your classes change. And you may need an accommodation in a lab that you wouldn't need in English class. If you can, picture that. If you're always taking lecture classes and you've got a writing disability, well, then yeah, you're going to always need those same accommodations. You won't have to ask for those accommodations every semester. But what will happen is that, if they use those software systems, what will happen is your student will receive an email and it will say, do you want to notify your new professors this semester that you get, rubrics for writing assignments and, no spelling penalty or whatever. Then all the student has to do is say yes. You tick a box and say, I want Professor Smith to know this, I want Professor Jones to know this, I want Professor Adams to know this, and you send it. And that accommodation, it's already approved. It's usually approved for the 4 years. But any new accommodations that you may need based on the courses that you're taking or the way the professor does the course, that may be, an issue. If this particular professor is a stickler about spelling and nobody else has been, you may want to go back to disability services and get a spelling, no spelling penalty as an accommodation. Just keep those things in mind. Okay, like I said, get either a power of attorney or the schools sometimes have a release to allow you to be part of the discussion. And as long as your student, your child is okay with you being a part of those meetings, you should go because you're paying for it. The interactive process. This is, so the student signs up for a meeting and they upload their documentation, and then they schedule a meeting with somebody in the Disability Services office, and then there should be a good faith conversation between the student and the staff member to review. And what good faith means is that the school is willing to accommodate and the student is willing to engage. That's, the good faith between both of these members. And this is what qualifies them as an individual with a disability, and the accommodations that they propose at the meeting are discussed. And, if there's sort of an accommodation that's not typical, like I need to wear different shoes, the disability service officer may say, well, tell me about that. Why do you, why can't you wear the, orthopedic clogs that all the nurses wear? And that's when you would say, well, I have diabetes, and, I have very poor circulation in my feet, and, this is what my doctor, recommends that I should wear, et cetera. That's where, you would understand that. What I will say is that if the accommodation is denied, they need to come, the DSO, the Disability Service Office, should come up with an alternative. And if they don't, they better be able to explain why they are denying it. It has to be a fundamental alteration, or it has to be administratively burdensome. There's another caveat that, if something is financially onerous to a school, then, they don't have to do it. That has been interpreted over the years to mean taking the entire budget of the school is, requiring a physics textbook to be converted into Braille at a cost of $10,000. Is that considered financially onerous? No, it's not. It isn't. So, that sounds like a crazy amount of money to spend, or, a sign language interpreter. They get, hundreds of dollars an hour. Well, that's what this person needs. And it has to be based on what the person wants, not what you're willing to give. So if the person needs an ASL interpreter, and you say, we're just going to give you a transcript of the course because we're already doing that for somebody with dyslexia or dysgraphia, no. It's based on what the student wants. And conversely, if you don't if you don't use sign language, and they say, well, we already have another deaf student in the class, so you've got an interpreter, you don't get a transcript. If the student wants a transcript, the student gets a transcript. If that's the way the student receives, communicates, receives information, that is the way it should be. There's more on the the fundamental alteration that we'll get to. So determinations have to be made on a case-by-case basis. There are no reasonable accommodations for everyone. Like I said, you can be deaf, so it doesn't mean that every deaf student gets an ASL interpreter. Only those who know sign language get an ASL interpreter. Not every student with dyslexia is going to want a transcript, or an e-reader or whatever. So it has to be based on that conversation that you have. Disability services can table a decision in that interactive process. Sometimes they bring it to case review. They'll bring it to the whole office, and they lay it out there and say, what do you think? Is this reasonable? Everyone will review the documentation, and it gets decided. Also, they may say we need more documentation. So then the ball is in the student's court to come up with more documentation. And the school, if they say the accommodation would be a fundamental alteration of the curriculum or whatever, what they have to do is they have to have a committee meet to decide on it, and that would include faculty members from, the course of study, faculty members from other courses of study, probably the dean of student affairs, the dean of academic affairs, the professor, the academic chair of the department. I mean, it is, the hardest meeting to schedule. And they would have to say what the student has asked for alters the requirements of the program. It reduces the rigor in some way, or alters, what we hope to achieve, the essential requirements of the program. And that's a really high burden for schools to meet, because they tend to just make a decision and expect the kid to just go with it. So if an accommodation is denied, you get it in writing. Yes? In primary to secondary, absolutely, all the time. All the time. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yes, right. That's something that's more IDEA, so we can talk about that afterwards. But yeah, that's like that. We'll call that a Monday through Friday. Yeah, that happens all the time. Okay. The interactive process isn't even found in 504 or the ADA. It is found in the EEOC, the Employment Commission's regulations. The EEOC has said that there should be an interactive process between the employer and the employee to determine what, the employee needs as an accommodation to prevent, disability discrimination. And the colleges have gone with it. And now it is accepted that you have to go through this interactive process. The problem with the interactive process is that it's communication. And if somebody has a communication disability or a disability that somehow impacts communication, then how do you do this? This is why I say, so my son has autism. I'm like, I am on that call. You best believe I am on that call, because he doesn't think, quickly enough. It takes him longer to process and to respond. So I'll be on that call, or I was on those calls. Those are the kinds of things that can happen. Or there's anxiety, or they're intimidated by, adults. Or somebody, sort of rushes them out of the office. They don't give them the time that's really required. That's why I want to be, if I'm a parent, I want to be in that meeting. But under the ADA, there is something called the effective communication provision. And what that is that whatever is written or spoken must be as clear and understandable to people with disabilities as it is for people who do not have disabilities. And what they say is that it really depends on the situation. So like if you're in a restaurant and you're blind and they don't have the menu in an app that's digitized that you could have read out to you, a waiter can come and read the menu selections because it's a short duration, right? It's a quick thing. That's something we can do. You can't necessarily do that in the interactive process. Have somebody sort of effectively communicate, like give you sort of the things that you need. What can happen is you can say, I want this policy revised because my effective communication is altered by my disability and this process. So that's where you would say, I really want, I want to understand what will happen in this process. You send an email and say, I would like your student would send the emails. I would like to know what kind of questions I'm going to be asked, and then you can help your son or daughter with how to answer these things, okay? And maybe just submit them in writing for the Disability Service Office. Okay. Yeah. Supports. Yeah. Yeah. You can. I would just go back to disability services and maybe, escalate it to the person in charge, because it may be, a graduate student who may or may not be familiar with the ADA and all that's required. Sometimes they will hire grad students at the beginning of a semester when they've got an influx of students coming with, requesting, letters of accommodation. So sometimes they hire temporary people to, get through things and give them, sort of cursory training. So I would just go to the person who's in charge of the office. I would not escalate it to the president of the college. I just think that's ridiculous. I mean, way to make friends and influence people. So that's, that's what I would do. There should be a grievance policy online. And if they don't have their grievance policy online, that's bad for them. So what I did with my son's first college, I said, please send me the grievance policy. It isn't online as it should be. And I kept going up the chain of command until I got to the dean of students, and then the president called me and said, come in for a meeting. So I had to go to Massachusetts, for a meeting. This is very, very convenient for me. But yeah, that's what you would do. You wouldn't, you could do a grievance. You could go through there are different ways that you can do it. You could also just go to OCR, the Office of Civil Rights, and just say, file a complaint and say, my kid has a disability, I asked for this, I believe this is reasonable. You can file a complaint on your student's behalf, or you can write it and have, him or her sign it. And yeah, OCR has been taken to giving financial rewards now. It's limited, because I think even a case, depending on the size of the university or the college, I think the most they can award, even with a fully adjudicated case, is $300,000. Is that right, Sonali? It's like $300,000 is like the maximum award that you can get in an ADA case? With something that's fully adjudicated, like through DOJ. I think it's not, it depends on the size of the institution, but I'm pretty sure it's not a lot of money, which is why attorneys tend not to take these cases, because you could spend $200,000 fighting the case, and knowing that the student ends up with little or nothing as a result. So they really need to change that. But so if something is an essential requirement for a course, it cannot be altered. And we had a case of a kid. He was a senior this fall semester, and he was a business major with a concentration in finance. So he was required to take calculus as part of this requirement, and that makes perfect sense. You know, you need to know derivatives if you're going to be in finance, right? Hedge funds are all based on derivatives. So he waited until his senior year, and I mean, I couldn't take calculus after a 3-year break from any math. Could you imagine? I mean, I would be lost. You would have to like go back to algebra for me. So this is what this kid did. And like a month in, he knew it was mathematically impossible for him to pass. And he's going to graduate this year. So what we did, I looked at, there were several different types of business majors. And one of them, marketing, did not require calculus. And I said to this kid, who happened to have a job already lined up because he had had internships, and the company loved him so much, they said, when you graduate, here's your contract, we want you. And so he didn't care, like whether he graduated with a marketing degree, business administration with a marketing or finance, right? Didn't matter, he had his job. And he switched. And then we were able to give him a math substitution. Now, that can happen when it is not an essential requirement of the course. So you can get a language waiver, math waiver, or math substitution, language substitution. Generally, substitutions are more common than total waivers. But if you have a language-based learning disability and you never took, Spanish or French or Chinese or whatever during school, the primary through secondary school, a lot of schools will say, that's okay, you can do one on Italian culture. And I would be down for that like any day of the week. Like if I could just sit there and eat cannolis, I mean, like what a great class. So that's, that was what they would do at Southern. They would give you a language waiver. Or if you were bilingual, they would just say, you're good. You already speak Spanish, we'll just waive that requirement. So that was easily waived. Just, understand that. Like, ask about when you are interviewing colleges, do you offer course waivers? Do you offer course substitutions? And if, my kid wants to go to, be a pharmacy major, and I'm going to be asking for, some sort of waiver, like a language waiver would be fine. However, if your student is going into international relations, no, you're not going to get a language waiver. They want they want you to have a language. I remember when I was, when I had graduated from high school, ever so long ago, I wanted to do engineering, and I knew that you needed either French or German. That was the requirement. You either needed to speak French or German in the engineering classes back in the early 80s. Those were considered like the international languages of engineering. And the programs I was looking at, that's what they wanted. So un petit peu French, un petit peu. So I didn't go into engineering, but just so you're aware of those kinds of things. Like that was the requirement back then. Now I think they've realized it's not essential. So these things change over time. The school OCR, the Office of Civil Rights, gives a lot of deference to schools on these academic decisions. They will not say, we would do it this way. They just want to show that the school has documentation of what they did, how they met with the student, all of their notes, what is the rationale for why they made the decision that they did, and that it wasn't a unilateral decision, that if they were claiming it was a fundamental alteration, that they went through that committee process. If they didn't, OCR is going to find against them. So that's good to know. Next. Possible accommodations, I've given, a few here. We can talk about this if you have any questions afterwards. Tips for transition. IDEA is supposed to prepare them for transition. They don't. I mean, let's just be real. They really don't. So you've got to do it. What else is new? In high school, have your child take challenging classes, to your point. Research college program prerequisites. Just because somebody can get a diploma doesn't mean, a high school diploma, doesn't mean that they would get into the college of their choice. So when I was looking at engineering as a major, I took 5 years of math in high school. And so I doubled up in my senior year. I was so much fun in taking 2 maths. And so that was important because I knew I was going to need these things. And that, it is important to know what the program that you want to go into, what they're going to require, so that you don't basically, shut yourself out from that program by the choices that you make in high school. One of the things that we do a lot, if the school says, oh, he's ready to go to college, that's when I say, go to Norwalk Community College, say that you want to take a class. And maybe you should take a class. Kids who are in high school can take classes at the community colleges for free. You just have to do it on your own time. So I did this with my son. And because he hadn't yet taken the SAT, they gave him a test called the AccuPlacer. And what the AccuPlacer does is it says, you are ready for college level classes or you're not. And you may need just 1 class of remediation to take English 101, or maybe you're going to need 3. And that's all on your dime. Same with math. It will give you like a math rating, basically, and say, you know what, you can do college algebra, but you won't be able to do it in 2 days a week. You're going to have to go 5 days a week, and you're going to have to go to, I don't know, they have these classes that they make them take, and it's escaped me what it's called, but so they have to go to an extra class on top of the 5 classes a week, and it's like a tutorial. Or they're going to say, you need remedial classes. And all of those remedial classes are on your dime if you don't use the community colleges. And, you're talking about a class that will, bless you, that will cost like $5,000 or more, depending on the college that you go to. So, and your kid has to take the class, but doesn't get any credit for it. It doesn't go towards the major. So it's going to necessarily extend the time. So that's when the school says, he's ready for college, and we're going to put, on our transition page and our, post-school outcomes that, Johnny is ready for the 4-year college. No, Johnny isn't, because the AccuPlacer from Norwalk Community College said he needs 3 remedial classes before he can do this. What the heck are you doing in math? That's sort of a strategy that you can use to, get them to possibly give you a year of transition. And I have gotten kids a year of transition, say like, you'll go to Norwalk Community College because the parent doesn't think the kid is ready for college. You either get the school to pay for it, or it's, free because they're Connecticut high school students still, in a transition program. They haven't received their diploma yet, so it would be free. But I say I want an executive function coach, or I want a writing tutor, or I want a math tutor on top of it. So you can do that. And there's a guidance letter, and I think If Eve reminds me, I will get the guidance letter. But there is a guidance letter from OSEP, the Office of Special Education Programs, that says that the IDEA money that is set aside for transition can be used for college programming if a kid needs to go to college in order to prepare for college. So there is guidance on that. Yeah. Yes. I want the acuplacer. Right. Mm-hmm. Yes. Right. Yeah. Excellent point. Right, and it's low stakes, but just know your student, know your kid, because I had my son go to Norwalk Community College because I knew he could do it, and I wanted to show him it's not this big scale, because a lot of times the schools will be like, oh, you're not ready for college, or like they really like wait till you get to college, and how remember they did that to all of us when we were going into high school. Like, oh, high school's going to be so different. And you were terrified to go to high school. So it's that kind of a thing. You just want to make sure that, the student is capable of a failure. But I really think it is important to fail before you go to college. It's really important. And having, every kid get a trophy, and it doesn't do us any good, because, our kids aren't resilient, and what happens is they also don't believe it. When you do praise them, and it's justifiable praise, they've been praised their whole life. Good job, good listening, good this, good that, good yawning. I mean, the stuff that they will praise, and then they dismiss it out of hand. And so when you really tell them, no, that was a great essay, that was really, really good, and that is college material, they're like, yeah, sure. That is sort of a consequence of doing that. But it is important for a kid to fail and get over it before it's college and it's an $80,000 mistake. Your child should be able to tell the DSO what the diagnosis is. I've had kids who, like, I don't know what my disability is, and I would have to, go to the IEP, and sometimes the IEP will just write, specific learning disability is checked, and it doesn't tell me it's dyslexia, dysgraphia, dyscalculia. I don't know what kind of a specific learning disability it is, because it's never mentioned. So they should be able to say how it impacts them. Another tip, get a part-time summer entry-level job in high school. In college, most colleges will require or will offer internships, and that is great, because we want our kids to not have to go through the interview process, which a lot of them won't do well in, but have an internship as an interview. And that's great if you can have a kid get that, and then they get an offer of a job prior to even graduating from college. But having that part-time or summer entry-level job is really important. It gives them really great skills, how to negotiate with a boss, arriving on time, knowing when to push back and when not to push back. The customer's always right. All of those kinds of things are really important to know, so that when you do get the dream job, or even just gainful employment after college, you're not going to mess it up, because you have at least those baseline skills. Laundry, basic budgeting, banking, cooking, those kinds of things. Practice problem solving with your kid before you go to college. if, there's something that goes on, you hear about a friend, what would you do if this was the situation? I told my son, my 2 nephews, God, they'd kill me if they knew I was saying this. Two of them went, they went to, very, great colleges, and I don't even know what that sound is. Anyway, great colleges. They sent out their resume to their, their number one, picks for jobs, and each one of them had a typo. Did either one of them go to career services to have it vetted? No. And so the first 25 resumes that they sent out to their favorite, companies, they all found the circular file cabinet, also known as the garbage can. I mean, they didn't hear back from any of them. So tell those stories. And, cautionary tales. Make a few up. Who cares? I mean, just get it done. You're paying $80,000 a year. And don't feel like you can't say you have a 3-hour radius from your home. You can pick a college within 3 hours. I mean, when I hear that, parents are like, well, he wants to go to California. I'm like, California? It would take me more than a day to get to him if there was an issue. I want to be within 3-4 hours of driving distance. That's just, and know your child. I shouldn't say that, but don't feel like you can't say that. Start the college selection process early. I would say go to colleges. I would take my son to different colleges, just the Nutcracker is at Purchase, so that he knew Purchase is a state school. It's pretty medium. It's, focuses on arts. So that you would have that vocabulary in your mind before you were actually discussing colleges. Because they look at a website, the website is perfectly curated. It's going to look fabulous. And you can't go to every school, right? So you just want to be able to say, do you want a rural school? Do you want an urban setting? Do you want suburban? Do you want mid-sized? Do you want huge like UConn? We went to UConn, and when my son said I could go here, it was the last school we went to. I had no intention of sending him to UConn, but I was like, okay, dutiful mom, I'm going to check this box off. And he said I could go here, and I literally stomped my feet, and I said, no, you couldn't. You could not go here. The smallest class has 500 kids in it, and it's this huge, auditorium, and you would, totally zone out. And everyone here has got sports gear on. You hate sports. Everyone had UConn Huskies, a hat, the sweatpants. I was like, you would hate this school. And he just had no sense of it. And I just said, you're not going to UConn. You're just not. So you can do that. Yes, I'm the worst mother in the world. And he tells me, on a regular basis, you lied to me about that? Yes, I did. I did, because I just needed to get through the day. And, but and use that sort of sarcasm and humor and say that. You were a nightmare as a child. I tell him that all the time. And he's okay with it. He laughs at me. And it's fine, because you don't want the first time they hear that to be from a boss, and it just wounds them psychically, So I tell him, that he has not only won the gold medal in crossing the line. I was like, James, that long jump that you took when you made that statement, you got the gold medal. Nope, you actually got the platinum. They created a new medal for you, and you are even higher up on the platform when they are doing the national anthem. And he laughs. And I'm like, you can't say that. Just don't say that. That's the wrong thing to say. Use humor to diffuse, the kinds of things that, your kids are doing. And I tell him often when we're on the phone, I'll say, I can hear your eyes rolling. I know you are thinking, you stupid, stupid woman. I know he's saying that to himself. That's the tape that's running in his mind when I'm telling him, you should do this. And, what do I know? And it's okay, we have a house, we've got cars, we've bought you a car, we've sent you to college. We know nothing. We are just blithering idiots, obviously. Obviously. So of course, child of mine, roll your eyes, right? Like that's what they do. So use humor to diffuse that, because these are going to be very trying times getting your kids through this. I printed out the Common App and started working on it with him, because they started in high school, you know, at the like senior year of high school, and it's like sections are due like every week, and you cannot imagine like finding out the you know, all the different things they did in high school, like the different extracurriculars, how long that takes. They want the dates. They want, you know, all the awards and that kind of stuff. It takes a long time to do that silly stuff. So I made him start that in the summertime. And so that the start of, you know, senior year, he really didn't have homework to do, because he had already done the Common App, at least on paper. Then he just needed to type it in. So do that. There's one essay on the Common App that what I did is I went through the Common App, the different essays, I put it in Google, and I said, how many kids who did this essay got into college? Because they give you like 6 different choices. There's one essay, and they use the same essays over and over. They may change 1 or 2, but most of the essays are the same or similar. And the one essay that had the lowest acceptance rate was the one, tell us about a mistake you made and how you overcame it. Well, I was arrested when I was, you know, like that is the one question that they are asking, so they can say, next, you know, let's get rid of this kid. We don't want to know. So don't do the one about the mistake that you fixed. It's not good. So, you know, just check out, do a Google search. You know, don't take my word for it. Those things may have changed over time. See how many kids get accepted based on those essays. Go to the college websites. Have a realistic appraisal of skills, abilities, and the job market. You can go to JAN. What does JAN stand for? Job Access Network. It's a government site, and it will tell you like the job network. You know, the outlook. So, you know, my husband was a merchant sailor, and I was like, you know, he's doing this in, you know, the 80s and 90s, and I'm thinking, wow, what's the job market for merchant seamen? I mean, it really wasn't, you know, wasn't a great outlook. Talk about, you know, like a dying industry. So it's important to know, like, what is the job outlook? You know, like, do you want to be a philosophy major? Oh, well, okay. I mean, I'm not going to spend $80,000 so you can philosophize. Call me crazy. You know, just others would think differently, but I don't know what the job market is for philosophy majors, even in a college, because so many colleges are getting rid of their philosophy departments. And don't negate the value of community college, of career and technical education. This is important. You can get, you know, a certificate in being a CNC operator, you know, laser cutting. They'll make, you know, pretty decent money to start. And I mean, truly gainful employment. And, you know, somebody else will have loans and they might make $40,000 a year as opposed to $90,000 a year as a CNC operator. So it's technical, but, you know, it's really, I think, worthwhile. They won't have the student debt, so don't discount it out of hand. I know in Lower Fairfield County this is like anathema, but you know, I'm originally you know, from Brooklyn, and my parents were immigrants and was working class, so you know, just it's a means to an end. Don't just, you know, wax on poetic about philosophy and have, you know, $100,000 in student debt and no job afterwards. So just, you know, think about those things. Thank you for your time. If anyone has any questions, please, I'm happy to stay after if you have specific questions that are personal. But if you have any questions now.